Good evening.
Good evening.
Oh, come on. Good evening.
Good evening.
There we go. Welcome to the Dayton Art Institute and the newly renovated Mimi and Stuart Rose Auditorium. My name is Michael Rediger. I'm the director and CEO here at the Dayton Art Institute. We are honored tonight to partner with the NAACP and their president, Dr. Derek Forward, on an evening discussion on race relations. As a civic museum, we welcome being a place where people in the community can gather to have civil and constructive dialogue that promotes unity and understanding. As we continue to grow the museum's collection, we are focused on acquiring pieces that better represent our community, so everyone sees themselves in the galleries. We are committed to collecting more work of and by people of color and work by women. You can applaud for that. Thank you. We're working hard at it. We are continually striving to hire more people of color in management and leadership positions here at the museum and want to see more diversity serving on our board of trustees, our associate board, as well as having a more inclusive staff and volunteer team. Thank you. The DEI is for everyone, no matter your color, race, religion, gender, orientation, physical ability, or socioeconomic status. All are welcome at your Dayton Art Institute. Please note that if anyone is looking at this evening as anything other than a respectful dialogue, we politely ask you to reconsider. And if needed, we will ask you to either leave or we will have you politely escorted out of the museum. So with that said, we request that all of us view tonight's discussion as an opportunity to better understand one another and move forward together to find better harmony in Dayton, in our community, and in much needed our world. We will not solve all of the decades of divide in one evening here tonight, but if we open our hearts and our minds, we can come closer to what makes us more alike than different. I'm going to close this part with a quote from a contemporary African-American artist, Kehinde Wiley. Art is about changing what we see in our everyday lives and representing it in such a way that it gives us hope. Please now join me in welcoming for some opening remarks, Dr. Derek Forward.
Thank you, Michael. It is a great honor to see this distinguished group of people out here celebrating the rich diversity of Dayton, Ohio. As we go inside of this 3-day journey that the NAACP has put together. This is basically the first trip. And then we're going to go to a second and a third that I'm going to share with you here in just a minute. But according to Dr. Arthur Gibson, a University of Dayton professor who has studied the movement for over 20 years, white racial extremism is on the rise in the Miami Valley. He went on to say, activity is not expected to decrease over the next few years. There is evidence that since the 2016 election cycle, racist extremist groups have been significantly more active, distributing publications, organizing rallies, and communicating online, focused on the promotion of white supremacist ideology. Because Dayton is home of 51.7% white, 42.9% black, 0.9% Asian, and 3% Hispanic or Latino, according to the most recent census count, it is imperative that we come together this evening to engage in this conversation titled An Evening Discussion on Race Relations. That way, that we may move forward with more informed responses to white racial extremism. On behalf of the Dayton unit of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, I am honored yet humbled to have organized this evening's event with such great people like Michael Rediger, Alexis Larson, and Marsha Barnhart. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our partners, our panelists, our Misters of Ceremony, the Dayton Art Institute Security Detail, the Dayton Unit NAACP Security Detail, and all of you for your participation in our first 3-day community celebration event. Our next event, titled An Afternoon of Love, Peace, Unity, and Inclusion, will be held Saturday, May 25th at McIntosh Park, formerly known as Riverview Park, from 12 noon until 3 p.m. In our last event, titled Love Overcomes Hate, Cleansing of the Square, you may see some boards as you're riding down the highway that says, Rise Above the Hate, just to make certain that everybody understands that's the same event. So whether or not you see Rise Above the Hate, or whether or not you see Love Overcomes Hate, Cleansing of the Square, same event. Will be held on Sunday, May 26th at the Montgomery County Old Courthouse in downtown Dayton from 2 to 4 p.m. Also want to recognize one of our esteemed partners, Ms. Deidre A. Von Mike McGee from the U.S. Department of Justice. Please stand and be recognized. Thank you, and we look forward to engaging in this dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. Now on to the discussion. After nearly 4 decades in radio and television news, Marcia Bonhart recently retired as the Director of Media and Public Relations with Dayton Public Schools. She says she now has more volunteer time to give to the Dayton community. Tonight, she serves as our moderator. Please join me in welcoming and extending a big thank you to my friend and community leader, Ms. Marcia Bonhart.
Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you to the panelists who are here this evening. This is so very important, and I personally want to thank Michael with the Dayton Art Institute and Derek for understanding why this is so very necessary. So another round of applause, please. Thank you both for your foresight. So tonight as your moderator, it's my job to keep this conversation moving, and you will be given an opportunity to ask the panelists questions after the hour, the 45 minutes from 6 to 6:45. We're probably going to let it go till about 6:50 since we've inched over beyond the 6 o'clock. First, may I just remind everyone to please silence your phones, just in case you have not. We are here to think and talk, so we ask, as Michael has instructed, please continue with the civil decorum as you apply your questions. We're all here for the same reason. We want to help move this community to an equitable place in all areas. I'm going to introduce the panel. To my immediate right, Dr. Mark Pitcavage is an historian and authority on extremism in the United States. As a senior research fellow at the Anti-Defamation League, he is one of the country's oldest and most respected civil rights organizations. Dr. Pitcavage has served as director of the Center on Extremism. He's been the director of investigative research and the director of fact-finding. In these various positions, he has helped guide ADL's efforts to combat extremism and domestic terrorism. He has been actively involved with training law enforcement on terrorism and extremism issues for more than 20 years, working closely with the FBI and many state and local agencies. Shannon T.L. Isom is the president and CEO of YWCA Dayton. Isom is responsible for the executive and administrative leadership of the YW Dayton, which strives to eliminate racism and empower women. She is responsible to ensure high-quality outcomes, financial sustainability, organizational viability, and exceptional program service delivery. The YWCA Dayton carries a pivotal role in shaping the Dayton region. Her priority is to carry the mission and to ensure it is both a catalyst and a disruptor for issues that affect women, especially those most acutely felt through the lens of intersectionality. She served as a YWCA Dayton board member as well as board chair before taking the helm and ushering the YWCA Dayton into a $17+ million renovation and capital campaign project. Myla Cooper has worked in higher education for nearly 30 years as Assistant Dean of Students, Director of Multicultural Affairs, Director of Community Outreach and Service Learning, and Adjunct faculty. Right now, she's the Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion and Executive Director of the Coretta Scott King Center at Antioch College. Myla earned the Bachelor of Science degree in Communication Studies and a Master of Arts degree in Higher Education Administration from Indiana University of Pennsylvania. She is currently pursuing the Doctor of Ministry degree with focus in community development. Dr. Derek Forward has been a strong advocate for civil and human rights for more than 17 years, locally, statewide, and nationally, with the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. As president of the Dayton unit of the NAACP, Dr. Forward provided the Dayton unit NAACP with 3 strategic goals: to better inform the community about the NAACP, to proactively educate the community on issues that affect all Americans, and to empower more of us to become entrepreneurs, educators, community leaders, and corporate leaders, and to empower us to daily make better, well-informed decisions. Michael Newsom has been with Montgomery County for 18 and a half years and the leader of the Montgomery County Fatherhood Initiative since 2010. Prior to that, he was the child support supervisor for 10 years. He leads several community and county committees and is the organizer of the My Dad Rocks picnic at Island Park, which will take place for the 8th consecutive year, Saturday, June 15th. He holds a bachelor's degree from Wittenberg University, a master's degree from Wright State, and has participated in the Dayton Dialogue on Race and one of Montgomery County's first internal diversity councils in 2005. Daniel Jude loves working to build bridges of understanding and empathy across challenging divides. He believes deeply that all people matter, and he spent much of his life working in roles that have allowed him to develop thinking around the nature of education and learning, relationship building, and professional growth. As the former director for the Ohio and Indiana Diversity Councils, Daniel took a fledgling organization and grew its corporate membership ranks by nearly 2,000% in 2 years. He now owns and runs his own speaking and consulting business and works with conference planners, learning and development leaders, nonprofit boards, and corporate entities. Thank you again, all of you. Thanks so much. Just some thoughts, panel. There is thought, in fact, unfortunately, majority thought that race relations will never be healed, that there will never be race equity in either our global or local communities. Your thoughts? Derek?
Okay. Well, I'll take a stab at that. Well, I would say that number one is that when you think about race relations, we have everyday citizens that go to the polls and vote on legislation. We have local elected officials who pass city ordinance, state elected officials who pass state legislation, likewise for federal officials who pass federal legislation. But then we also have a president who can veto legislation. But it's one thing that you cannot legislate, and that's the heart of man or woman. There's only one person who is a divine being that can legislate the heart. So when I think about race relations and will it ever end, I don't think so, because people look at the words weed and seed. People look at those two words and say those words all the time. Weed in, seed in the good, weed out the bad. But I'm going to introduce a third word that the NAACP is quite familiar with, and that is breed. So even though you're weeding out the bad and seeding in the good, but then you also have a section of people that are breeding their youngsters to be, their children to be racist, to be bigots, and so on and so forth. So will it ever end? No. The NAACPs, we hope that we can run ourselves out of business. But as long as we had that third word of breed, unfortunately, I don't see it happening.
Dr. Pickavage, just talking about our local community, what about our global community when it comes to race relations? What are your thoughts globally?
Well, I agree with Dr. Forward that we're dealing with an issue that can never be solved. It can never go away, in the sense that human nature being what it is, there are always going to be frictions, there are always going to be divides, and there are always going to be people of ill will. And, if you look at what's going on in Europe, where you're seeing a rise in hate and extremism that parallels that's going on in the United States, or just in India, where some similar things are going on right now with the election, it can be really depressing. But I have to say, just personally, as I was introduced, I study extremism and terrorism, and I look at white supremacists and militia groups and a lot of nasty people, and I've done this for 25 years. And so I've seen into sort of the dark heart of what America can be, but at the same time, during that 25-year period, I've also again and again and again seen that people of goodwill outnumber those of ill will. And if people of goodwill are motivated and energetic and committed enough, they're going to win out. You guys are evidence of that. And so I know we can never solve things, but I know we can always work towards things. We can always get closer to that mountain.
And I think each of the other four, in their duties and their thoughts, in their particular organizations, certainly have a hand in trying to do exactly what you're saying. Mila, can you talk to us a little bit about what the Coretta Scott King Center is doing at Antioch College?
Sure. I actually want to take a stab at that question. First, I agree with Dr. Ford in terms of no, but I think it depends on how you frame the question. So initially, when I learned of the topic, race relations, I questioned what that meant. What does that mean to us? And I'm more interested in results than relations. Relations is kumbaya. You have a best friend or two, and you hang out. You get along with a few people, but results deal with systemic issues. And so those are some of the things that we are dealing with through the Coretta Scott King Center as we educate our students and prepare them to be change agents and citizens who will look for results. And unfortunately, I think relations may be strained, and as we move forward, certainly those can improve. But I do think we can get closer to equity. I think racism will always exist, at least in my lifetime, and so will white supremacy. But I think we have achieved some results over the generations and over the decades, and we will continue to do that. And so you applaud it when that you all will make a difference. And so I think the results will show whether we're serious about our applause or not.
The Southern Poverty Law Center says that in 2017 there were more than 950 different kinds of hate groups in the United States. And as you prepare your agents of change at Antioch, those numbers are fairly daunting, I would think. How do you prepare these young people for what these two gentlemen are saying is almost a very grim outlook? What do you tell these young people at Antioch through the Coretta Scott King Center?
That's an excellent question, and I do work with young people, some who don't frankly have hope that we will get this country together. But once you lose your hope, then what else is there to do? And so we try to educate them on issues that are impacting people's lives, whether that's through speakers or workshops and training. We also equip them to be activists in whatever issue that is important to them. And so while we're here tonight to talk about race, our students are involved in a number of different movements and actions, from Standing Rock with indigenous rights to the LGBT community and rights in those areas. And so we hope we are preparing them to be on the right side of justice, no matter what the issue is. And so our rhetoric and our conversation goes beyond race relations. It's more about justice and fighting against injustice.
And Daniel, thank you, Mila. That's a part of what you do in terms of building bridges and strengthening relationships, which is what Mila was talking about, that she's doing with the Coretta Scott King Center.
Yeah, I think when I think about the original statement that you posed, in terms of eliciting response, yes, there are people that exist on this side of the spectrum, and they are bad. They want to disempower, they want to disenfranchise, they And I suppose there could be people over here who are just as good. But I don't necessarily think that, in general, this is not a question of let's get all the good people to do battle against all bad people. I think, in general, it's many people are well-intentioned and don't know what to do with that. So in terms of building bridges, as I think about the conversation around race relations and other kinds of social justice issues and diversity, inclusion, and equity issues, I'm largely thinking about how do we translate people who believe that they are well-intentioned and generally are into more educated actors whose impact align with their intentions. And so a lot of times that involves getting people out of their own way, and into situations in which they're not the expert, into learning zones, into zones where they don't have all the answers, where the listeners, not the talkers, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of my bridge building revolves around that intent versus impact conversation, and playing in the middle where people are largely well-intentioned but don't necessarily know what to do with that.
And Michael, I see you nodding, and would you say who has been saying what, that it could be considered a benchmark of the Dayton Dialogue on Race Relations?
Well, I mean, I would agree with everything that's been said. First of all, I mean, I really don't think, when you sent the question initially about healed, I don't think the problem is ever going to be fully healed. It reminded me of my old football knees that are always going to be arthritic from here on out. You know, but I'm going to be able to, am I going to be able to deal with it and cope with it and put myself in a situation where I can be successful. So it's always good to come to these events to represent, quote unquote, the system. I work for Montgomery County, and it's extremely important for us to, be all about inclusion. And what we can do as some of the leadership is several of the committees I lead, we always make sure that there's diversity on those committees, because we want the committees and our Montgomery County to represent the statistics that Derek sent forward, because what we do is very life-changing. If you're unable to receive public assistance that you need, if you're unable to receive child support, if you're unable to get a fair shake in court, then I mean that obviously has a huge impact on people's lives. So we're very in tune with diversity and how important it is, for the inclusion of Montgomery County.
Dr. Pitkavage, when you mentioned that there's such a rise in hate groups in Europe, is there any place in Europe, do you think, today or anywhere where there's a panel discussion trying to fix things over there? They've had a terrible time the last 3 or 4 years. What's going on over there in terms of healing extremism?
Well, the one good thing about what's going on in Europe, particularly Western Europe, is that there are a lot of strong civil society groups, equivalents of the NAACP or the ADL or, countless other groups that we have in this country that are concerned about the extremism that has arisen because of immigration, because of refugees, because of anti-Muslim prejudice. And they do what they can, and some of them are doing quite a lot to help deal with the problem. The areas that are the most, the areas where this are hardest are those European countries where the far right essentially controls the government, and particularly in countries like Hungary, where the far right in control of the government has actually been taking over the press and has actually been making the activities of civil society groups harder to accomplish, and so there's a divide in Europe between those countries where you have that kind of effect with the far right in control, and those countries like Germany, for example, or Great Britain, where it's not.
And last but not least on that issue, Shannon Isom, in reference to the YWCA Dayton and its role, and a most recent role in terms of online challenge, asking people to think about different discriminatory issues.
Yeah.
You are really challenging, as they challenged in Cleveland as well.
Yes, yes. As I think about the question, and my esteemed panelists, they've answered, I have to say that outside of the fact that there's many parts of our community, many cohorts within our community that are just absolutely exhausted, that we have to make sure that we're not answering in our exhaustion. I think that the answer to the question is that, of course, we are going to see elimination of racism. Of course we are. I stand on that because Sojourner Truth stood on it, because Harriet Tubman and Paul Robeson and James Baldwin and Martin Luther King and me. And so we have to press in, and in pressing in, we know that the energy will then press forward. And so what we have to believe is that all of the things that we do collectively, in due time, in due season, even if you feel exhausted, that the end of it will, that it will be eliminated. You have to believe it. There's too much work to do, and we need everyone doing the work. And so one of the things that the YWCA that vociferously says we will eliminate racism, boldly says that we will eliminate racism and empower women, and that mission alone bans not only 200 of us across the nation, but then an additional 150 of us across the globe. We also know that there has to be a bifurcation of the energy in which we do that. And so one of the things that we've taken upon, and Cleveland has started it, is how do we have the conversation be more introspective, and especially for those who grapple with the energy of we will eliminate racism and empower women. Many people don't know how to do that, but they know how to be thoughtful in their own space. They know how to challenge themselves internally. They know how to do the work and are ready to do the work. And it is in due season that, again, that work will come together collectively. So with our challenge, we have allowed people who it's harder to come to the square and to the courthouse and to walk down the street and to hold a sign, that they internally do that within their space so that they become, as was already been mentioned, strengthened to when it's time for them to do their work, that they will be ready.
You mentioned MLK, James Baldwin, Harriet Tubman, and certainly the battle was ensuing in those days, but now, in this century, it has expanded. Anti-Semitism was always there, but it has certainly expanded. LGBTQ, Islamophobia, it's stretched to other areas now. What would they say?
The only thing I'll say a couple things and let others speak, but the only thing that I would say that I think is interesting about the battle is that when my mom and my dad did the battle in the 60s, there was a need to have a unification of one voice and of one energy, because the root and the systemic issues and the barriers were so deep and embedded, and they penetrated, and they were heavy and onerous, and a lot of them are today. But what is so wonderful about the continuum and the perspective is that what looks like what needed to be just one voice and one unit moving forward, we have now generations that have multiple voices, and many have joined the fight. And when you have the diversity of voices and the diversity of perspectives and the diversity of generations, which is good, joining the fight, then you actually untether some of those things that were so tightly bound, and you get to do and spread the work across many shoulders. So I think that although it may look like there's more, I just think that there's more soldiers, and that braid and that knot have been untethered a bit.
And some black leaders feel that that has taken the focus away from the black struggle, that diversity. Derek?
Well, I kind of want to jump into what she was saying about now as I think about 2008 and 2012, have we made progress? Absolutely, okay, because it showed in 2008 and 2012. A lot of young people, when I go and speak with a lot of young people who do not look like me, what they share with me is that they don't hold the same values that their parents and their grandparents hold. They have their own set of values. And therefore, that's how you were able to elect Barack Obama in 2008. That's how you were able to elect Barack Obama in 2012. It wasn't just because African Americans went to the polls in record numbers, but it was because a lot of young white, basically a lot of young white adults, went to the polls and exercised their right to vote. And when we come together as a people, as a nation of people, understand that if you prick my hand, if I prick your hand, we're all going to bleed that same red blood that the Lord has pumped inside of our bodies, then we can continue to move forward. But I can tell you just from Martin Luther King, I have a picture inside of my office that basically shows how Martin Luther King and Malcolm X are up in the sky and they're crying because they see all the negative things that are happening today and what they fought so hard for. They're not showing any progress. When I'm seeing, and I got to be quite frank with you, when I see black on black violence, it irritates me to my core. When I see black on blacks talking about one another on Facebook, it irritates me to my core. So I'm not, that's why I really want to have this dialogue, because at the end of the day, it's not about white versus black or black versus white or Hispanic versus Jew or whatever the case may be. How can we as Americans drive this car down the road and get along with one another? That's really what it's about. So to answer your question, Marsha, I think that they will be quite still disturbed a little bit. I don't think that they will be happy with what they're seeing today. Is there progress? Yes, without apology. But we need more progress.
At the risk of disagreeing with my beautiful sister here, and I applaud and honor the mission of the organization that you lead, but I don't know if the question really should be, and I know this is part of the mission of the YW, is the mission, or is the question, will racism be eradicated, I guess, because I think we could spend the whole evening debating that. I go back to results. And so what is the goal beyond eradicating racism? And let me just try to mention a couple of things in terms of results. When there are still disparities in black and brown communities, when we still in this state fund public education in a way that has already been deemed unconstitutional, but we're still doing that. When there are disparities in every type of health situation that you can imagine, when food access is based on your zip code. And so to me, it's beyond what's coming with this group from Indiana. I have asked myself this question though, why Dayton? Why did they pick Dayton? Is there some undercurrent here that, some other coalition that no one's talking about? I'm not from Dayton, so I can say that. But seriously, I think we need to look at results and disparities and discrimination beyond hate groups, because that's the easy part, because they are overt.
Where she disagreed with me. Where did you disagree with me?
I don't think I'll see the eradication of racism in my lifetime.
I think that as long as we're asking those questions on the platform that this has to be eradicated and eliminated, then that's where we get the results. Because how do we then, to be quite honest, I'm not from Dayton either, so I'm allowed to, I hope, question and press a little bit. This city is so segregated on all of those levels that I don't know how we cannot question racism is here, and we should be questioning every aspect of racism. I would also say, if you don't mind, to Dr. Ford, is that I am less interested, although I am interested in black on black, and I am more interested on city on black. I am more interested on power on black. I'm more interested on disparities on black. I am much, much, much more interested in the power structure on black. I am much interested in all of that conflation on women, violence on women, 1 in 3 black men in jail. I'm much more interested in that, although I am interested in how we treat each other on Facebook. That to me is low on the totem pole. And I want to say that. I want to say that because, not to disagree, but because I think it's easy to be distracted when you don't have a lot of energy. And we can't be distracted. Okay, I'm done. Let me let others talk.
You go, girl.
You don't have to be finished, Shannon. You don't have to be finished. It's okay. And since we were talking about hate groups, I mentioned that there were more than 950 in this country. And let's bring it closer to home. In Montgomery County, one identified hate group, the New Militia, and in Dayton itself, the New Black Panther Party and the Army of Israel. Now, whatever you all think about those organizations' names, I will tell you those are on the radar of the Southern Poverty Law Center. So don't wait for me later about identifying them. Truly, they are identified by the Southern Poverty Law Center. When it's that close to home, when you have them right here, and Mila was asking, she was concerned and wondering how this group that's coming Saturday chose Dayton. Dr. Pitcairn?
I can speak to that in sort of a general sense. I don't have insight into the decision making behind this particular group, but I can say that in general, when white supremacists decide to choose a city or town for an event, it tends to be for one of 2 reasons. Sometimes there are other reasons, but mostly it's one of 2 reasons. The first is if there's been some sort of major, usually racial controversy in a city or town, you can often find a white supremacist group scurrying to that city or town to try and exploit it, knowing that it'll be easier for them to get free publicity. And this even includes their own events. So if they have an event that they consider successful and it becomes controversial, they may want to come back. The other most common circumstance is simply because one of their members or supporters, typically an energetic member or supporter, lives in that area and basically says, look, you should do it in place X and I will help you put it together. And it doesn't necessarily, in those circumstances, it's not necessarily reflective of the community. One of the things I've observed over the years is that many cities and towns do a sort of soul searching when they learn that the Klan is coming to town. And that's the question they ask. Why is the Klan coming to town? Now, I think it's important for any community to regularly do the sort of soul searching. Are we treating people right? Do we have, whether person to person, whether institutionally, whether, is there equity? Is there social justice? But whether or not a Klan event or other white supremacist event is being held in a town, that's not necessarily going to be the bellwether. That's not necessarily going to be the indicator of whether you have a problem or not. And in fact, sometimes that can be a distraction where you may pay attention to that and not to other problems. And so what you can do is you can use the fact that one is coming to town to ask those questions, not to make assumptions that Dayton has, is horrible compared to some other community where there's not a Klan rally this weekend. Not to make assumptions, but just to use the opportunity to say, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? Where do we really need to put our energy? How can we make this a better place for everybody of every background?
And on the other hand, so that just to create some balance, the SPLC also said that the number of hate groups in Ohio has dropped significantly. So statewide, the number has dropped. I want to know what Daniel would have to say, how you would reflect on what Dr. Pitcairn said.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to synergize a lot of the thinking here, and I also want to preface this. You may not have noticed, I'm a white guy, and so I want to preface some of my comments with they're coming out of stasis, for instance, when they talk about Klan where I've not been on the receiving end of threats and violence from the Klan in either perceived or real circumstances. So, but the way that I'm seeing this play out is as a distraction, right? That we were kind of talking on stage earlier. 20 guys rolling in from Indiana, what does that actually mean in our city? Not anything necessarily that we don't want it to. The real questions for me is some of the systemic challenges. So, for instance, in Dayton, why is it that 20% of white high schoolers in Dayton graduated and only 13% of black high schoolers in Dayton graduated? Right? That's the violence that's being perpetuated in the city of Dayton, right? We talk about, we've already hit all of the disparities, stole all my thunder. That's the insidious violence that's being perpetuated against communities of color in our metropolitan spaces across Ohio. And then we're asked to look at 20 guys rolling in from another state who are going to make a fool of themselves in the courthouse. And what we need to be doing is challenging, for me, leveraging the privilege that I have to move in and out of predominantly powerful white spaces, leveraging that privilege and asking questions like, why is there this disparity of percentages? And working in the corporate space, asking questions like, why are we all okay that we have our token person here in some regard? Why is nobody else asking questions about this? Why is it unique to ask questions and so forth? So, for me, I think the real problem and the real violence that's being perpetuated is systemic power on communities of color, and that's a result of this.
Yeah, well, I just want to say also, I agree with most of what's been said. I think we have to be very careful to not realize that we have some power ourselves. I mean, we have to empower ourselves. You talk about some of the education issues that are going on. From our perspective, a lot of it has to do with the breakdown of the family. And 72% of homes in Dayton are fatherless. So when you think about those type of statistics, it doesn't matter what Donald Trump says. I'm looking for a father to listen to. So if my father's not in the house, then all of a sudden I am a little bit more susceptible to whatever the system is going to bring to me. My father and mother, I'm looking, it's not an either or situation. But again, I think we have to be very careful in this globalized world, the internet world. Everything that happens on TV or on the internet doesn't necessarily have to have a direct impact on us. We have a great ability to control our own situation, not only locally, but in our own neighborhood, in our own house, in our own family. And so that's, again, really what we try to push and talk about. You can't rely on the system. I think we've all figured that out. And I work for the system. So you got somebody up here that works for the system saying you can't rely on the system. Don't rely on it. Make sure that you take control of your own destiny as much as possible. And again, I'm a black guy from Xenia, Ohio, so believe me, I've been on the receiving end of the N-word as a kid growing up and everything else. So I feel all that, I really do. But at the same time, we have to make sure that we take control of what we can take control of. A lot of it has to do with not having a bunch of babies out of wedlock and a lot of those different types of things that are in our control. And so, again, everything that is said is correct, but at the same time, we're not powerless as citizens to take control of our own lives.
So I just want to touch on a couple of different things. One is results. I like my last words, results. And then also what Dr. Pitkavich stated, reasonings why they could be coming to town. Number one is that they're probably coming to town to recruit. Okay, they have members here, and they're looking to recruit new members. That's what our intelligence is telling us. But however, I can tell you this, when you talk about results, and I hope that this is not the tie-in to what Dr. Pitkavich is saying. And that is, about 2 years ago, it's been maybe 2 or 3 years ago, the Dayton unit NAACP took on a significant case. We have investigators at our office that deal with cases day in and day out. And majority of those cases is either employment related and or criminal justice related. So when I think about the criminal justice side, and I think about all of the people who we have sent down to the sheriff's department, all the people we have sent down to the Dayton Police Department to get some resolution through their internal affairs division. In this particular case, we were basically sending people who we were sending to the sheriff's department at that time would have never received justice because they were going into an area and to see people who were flat out racist. You know, so we conducted a 3-4 month investigation, and we wanted to make certain that when we turned that investigation over, you know, to the sheriff's department, that they had no other recourse but to terminate the employment of 2 high-ranking law enforcement officers. And then 3 or 4 of them, I believe 4 of them got disciplined and 2 were terminated. You know, so when we're talking about results, those are some of the kind of results that we need to continue to press towards. You know, if it's eradicating those type of people out of even you know, our higher learning institutions. When I think about grocery stores closing inside of our community, when I think about hospitals or healthcare facilities leaving out of our communities, those are signs or issues that we need to continue to work on. But we need to work on those things together. So as we work on things together, then we can get things accomplished. So I'm with you, Sister Myla, continue to work towards, you know, results. And I will hope that other people will pick up that mantle as well, wanting to get some results instead of talking.
I agree, and it goes back to when Shannon said people are exhausted, and I think most of us, or all of us here on the panel, are part of the exhausted crowd. And so improving relations to me means that other people are going to be at the table doing this work. There are going to be coalitions beyond our organizations, are people who are doing the hard work. And I wanted to respond to what you were saying about power and privilege, and I appreciate that very much. And that actually gives me a tad bit more hope when I see white people doing the hard work of anti-racism. That's one of the things that we do at the Coretta Scott King Center at Antioch. We have an all-white group. They decided they were going to do it. It's led by them, 2 faculty members, and they meet weekly, and they, you know, it's a series. But they deal with anti-racism and how they, you know, how they can use their own, or how they do use their own privilege to oppress people. I mean, it's phenomenal. And those types of groups, those types of experiences, what the Y is doing through this online dialogue, those things do give me hope. And you said a lot. I can't unpack all of that right now, but we can't blame the people who are being oppressed for their own oppression.
Woo! I got to underscore that. Respectfully, brother, I have got to say that it's we do have a problem with single women raising their children, but we also have a problem with 1 in 3 black men going to jail over drugs, nonviolence, and now drugs is $1 billion company for those who put those laws in place. We do have a problem with fathers not being engaged, but we also have a problem with disparities of income, and that we get paid lower and we have more education, and we, in spite of all of that, still build. So I want there to always make sure that we're balancing, that we have root cause structures that are against specific communities. We have root cause structures that are against specific communities of color and of gender, and in spite of all that, there is still rise. And so when you see people oppressed under the oppression of the system, we can't say, I'm about to curse. You can't say, why are you on the floor? Because it's heavy. That's why. So there has to be the conversation of, yes, we definitely have individual regard. But God dog it. You know, it gets to a point where you say, you can't marginalize me by zip code. You can't give me any loans to fix my roof. You can't then take away all my transportation, give me low driving schools and teachers that are tired. And then on top of all that, put my family members in jail at the rate that we can't even recover. And then say, why are you on the ground? There's a problem with that. And so my preference is to talk about, yes, while at the same time I'm trying to lift you, brother and sister, at the same time I need to be screaming that the system has to be dismantled, and we need more people like all of us speaking that same message. And I will also tell you that there does need to be more white voices in this fight, because it's your problem. We're the victims, but you've made the system. And there has to be acknowledgement of that.
How difficult is that acknowledgement going to be? And I understand how that could certainly be an answer, panacea, but how do you think that will occur? That anyone from the majority society will actually stand up and say, yes, this is a result of what we have done, or rather what we have not done? Is that going to really happen?
It's happening. It just needs to happen more. In my little neck of the woods on my campus, we have a number of students and these are young people who are speaking up, who went to Charlottesville, who they want to go on Saturday, but I told them, please go somewhere else. So it's happening. We just need more people. I guess that's my answer.
And really, it was happening years ago, because I think about the founding, the NAACP. Before the founding of the NAACP was the Negro National Committee. Everybody knows W.E.B. Du Bois. Everybody knows that name, and Ida B. Wells, who was a writer, for the newspaper. So everybody knows those names. But then when I think about, and that was basically an all-black committee, the Negro National Committee. But what W.E.B. Du Bois soon found out is that we could not get everything done that he wanted to get done with just African Americans. So early in the 1900s, W.E.B. Du Bois and Mary White Ovington, she's a Caucasian lady, Mary White, their paths crossed. And when their paths crossed, it came to the point where, as Mary White Ovington had this vision to say, why don't we join our forces together? Build this coalition, which ultimately became the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. So early in our history as an organization, majority of the founders of the NAACP were actually Caucasian. So if we have an opportunity to have more people like yourself, more, and I say it all the time, we need more Mary White Ovingtons. Quite simply, we need more Mary White Ovingtons to step up. We need more Daniel Judays to step up. So when we have that, we need more Bill Mears to stand up. He's been a member for about 40 years of the NAACP. But if we don't have you to stand up, then we're going to continue to be at a crossroad. And then that's why the NAACP is constantly knocking at your door. People come down our office, people who you wouldn't even imagine who would come down our office to file a complaint in housing, to file a complaint of employment, to file a complaint in education, to file a complaint of health care. Thank God that we have individuals at our office who has a heart, because none of us get paid for what we do. We get paid $0.00. But the Lord has given each one of us KSAs, knowledge, skills, and abilities to help people. And we do it from the depths of our heart. So we need more Mary White Ovingtons, more Daniel Judays. Thank you for stepping up, even to take that challenge, to even state that inside this room today.
We also need you not to just stand up publicly. We need you to stand up privately in your homes and with your friends and call out racist behavior. We need you to do that too.
Yes, Daniel.
I just want to comment too about maybe the shift generationally in what engaging white allyship looks like. Because as we've already been noting across the panel, a lot of the racism and other isms that happen in our society today are far more insidious, less obvious than they were, and so it's less, in my experience, it has been less about instructing people, you are a racist, and more instructing them and helping them deconstruct. You live in a racist system in which you are a privileged member. Let's deconstruct the privilege and help you see how that helps you operate, and then walking into the realization that not everyone has that privilege. So I think there's been a shift of look how crazy this is, you should get involved, to things are working really well for you, aren't they? Let's unpack that a little bit and then start looking around and seeing who things, for whom are things not working very well. So I think that's a shift in what it means to engage, at least as a white person doing this work, what it looks like to engage white on people.
Dr. Pitkavich, I know your expertise is global extremism. So I want to end this session with you in terms of what effect does global extremism have on what is happening to us and our communities in the United States?
Well, thanks for giving me the easy question. You know, we live, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, our world was a bunch of different worlds, and they intersected sometimes and in some ways and only slightly, and you might get transmissions of ideas, you might get coordinated or group actions. Today is a different world. We are one world. And ideas that can spread, that can start in one place thanks to the internet, the fastest transmitter of ideas and concepts, good and bad, that we have ever seen. Something that starts here will be here before you know it. I've seen that just in the United States alone, where one extremist movement now can arise and transmit its ideas to the whole country overnight, or within weeks. You can find movements emerge. Everything happens so much faster now. And distance is no barrier. I'll give you one example. A European far-right thinker came up with the idea of the Great Replacement. And this was the notion that white Europeans were being replaced by immigrants, non-white immigrants, particularly Muslim non-white immigrants, coming into Europe. And essentially, Europe was being de-Europeanized, and this will continue until there was nothing left. That concept almost immediately started showing up in the United States with American white supremacists. In Charlottesville, there were white supremacists chanting, "You will not replace us." Some were chanting, "Jew will not replace us," because they knew who was pulling the strings. But the problems that we face now are local and global at the same time, and we can't ignore either end of that spectrum. We have to work with partners overseas. I have one of my colleagues who is in Europe right now, meeting with a group of German and British and Polish counterparts and other organizations to hammer out these notions. I hope they figured it all out and they'll come back and say, it's fixed, don't worry. I don't think that'll happen. But we've got to meet locally too and figure out what's going on in Dayton. What can we do to make Dayton a better place? What can we do to make sure that the extremists that I'm an expert on are marginalized, that their voices are not dominant voices, but that these voices are dominant voices, and that the changes that the people here are talking about are feasible, are realistic, can be made into reality. Things are global, but they're always local.
And I just want to touch on this just real quick, Marshall. And that is, when I think about what Marshall was asking us in the beginning regarding how we can make things work, I gotta give, I have to give what's the word I want to use? Recognition where recognition is due. When whites and blacks, Hispanics, Latinos all get together and work together, then under the leadership of Reverend Dr. Rockney Carter, there's an organization called LEAD. LEAD took the lead when it came to getting bus stops in Beaver Creek. But it was a coalition of community partners that worked together to make that happen. It wasn't one race of people. It was a coalition of people to get bus stops right here, right down the road in Beaver Creek, Ohio. So I know that if we want another hospital, I know that if we want another grocery store, if we work together, we can get it done.
Assuming there are no further comments on this, we're going to close the panel discussion and open it to those of you who would like to ask a question or two.
I actually want to ask two quick questions and then I have a comment. The first question is with regard to why Dayton. So my perception as a Dayton resident is that we have a very vibrant and up-and-coming community. We have many issues. The divisiveness and racism within our community is well documented. But I think we have a vibrant community that's really up and coming, and I believe that they're coming here because they want to utilize that as a platform for recruitment, because there's going to be a protest. There will be people there, and it will create media that they will be able to use. So I'm curious about my theory. It didn't match yours, so I'm curious about that.
Well, I think you have a point, and it's important to understand one of the ways white supremacists recruit. I mean, the most common way that white supremacists recruit is person to person. You get recruited by your older brother, by your coworker, by your partner. But when they try recruiting methods, what they actually rely on is controversy and publicity. So, for example, Klan groups and alt-right groups and a lot of other groups will do leafleting or flyering. So they'll put up a few flyers on a college campus or neighborhood lawns. They don't expect anybody in that neighborhood to say, "Honey, I think we're joining the Klan today." What they expect is those people to call the police, those people to post on Facebook, those people to raise and understandably so, a hue and cry, and that will be picked up by traditional media, that will be picked up by social media, and it will be carried to thousands of people, some of whom might be sympathetic. And when it comes to extremist events, it's the same thing. They don't think that anybody, we're probably gonna have 20 to 30 people from the Honorable Sacred Knights and a couple other groups show up. They don't think that they're gonna convince anybody there at that event. What they hope is that the media will pick it up and social media will pick it up, and they hope that Antifa or the New Black Panthers or anybody else will be violent and confrontational so that they can portray themselves as standing up for themselves, standing up for the white race. And the more controversy, the more violence, the more whatever, the better for them, because the more publicity, the more it spreads, and the greater that pool of people, some of whom might be sympathetic if they see it. That's the insidious nature of this type of event, where they are trying to recruit, but they're not trying to recruit people right there at the event itself.
Right.
They're relying on social media and traditional media to give them access to a wider pool of people.
Great.
So is it appropriate for us to ask the media in Dayton not to show up? It's just a question.
No, this is an excellent question, and this is something that journalists have wrestled with, and civil rights activists and community leaders have wrestled with for decades, and have tried a couple different strategies. I'm going to give you my personal opinion. I think, and I may be biased because my life is devoted to looking at extremists. So obviously, I think they're a problem, and I think people need to know about them, and media is a good conduit for that. Where it goes wrong is when media is sensationalist, or when they are lax in terms of doing their research or their background, and sometimes they will present extremist groups as, oh, they're kind of warm and fuzzy, they're not what we thought at all. Or they give inordinate coverage. There are all sorts of ways they can go wrong. But not covering it has its own problems. In the 1960s, there was a neo-Nazi group, the American Nazi Party, headed by George Lincoln Rockwell. It was the first big neo-Nazi group in this country. And he was based in Virginia. And media in Virginia decided that they were going to do a blackout of coverage of all of this group's events and everything the group was doing. And they just didn't write about it. There was one newspaper which broke that and wrote about it. Nobody else did. Well, it did deny this group a lot of publicity that it sought. But at the same time, there were a lot of people in the area who probably kind of needed to know that these neo-Nazis were in that area too, right? So I don't have a problem with media coverage of something like a Klan event, as long as it's responsible coverage, as long as it's mature coverage, as long as it doesn't sensationalize or overexpose the group, and as long as it gives the entire context. And the context of this event is not simply the Klan. It's events like this, right? Because what this story really is look how the community is responding to this Klan event. There's one Klan event. We already know of at least 3 events, like this being one of them, and then cleaning the square and so forth. The event that's being held at the same time as the Klan rally elsewhere. That's the real story, where it's not these 20 or 30 guys who came to town, it's how the community came together to oppose that, right? That's a story.
So I'm going to squeeze in my comment before I ask my other question, because I know I have to give this away. So my comment is that many of you spoke about, and we all speak about, the fact that this issue is interwoven in our history. Systems need to be dismantled. Systems need to be reevaluated, reassessed, and reestablished. That doesn't happen without policy and legislation. That doesn't happen unless we vote. Now, everybody in this room, listen up. 152,000 people live in the city of Dayton. 8,458 cast a ballot in our primary election. That's a problem. So if we want to talk about being advocates, and we want to talk about spreading the word to our neighbors and our families, let's also talk about the power of our vote. Let's talk about getting people up to say, I'm going to run for office because I've got progressive ideas and I'm going to dismantle the system. That has to happen. That has to happen. And my last question, I went to Stanford to an equity conference, and there was a lot of discussion around intersectionality. And so I have this conflict, and I'm really interested in your point of view about this. We know that there is equity issues across the board, from a myriad of issues, race, sexuality, and I believe that intersectionality allows us to speak with a larger voice, more people joining the discussion. My worry and my concern is that from the beginning of our history and the beginning of time, oppression of Black people is woven into our history, and if we decide to approach it from an intersectionality point of view, then do we still take a back seat? Do the needs and the issues that are very real and baked into all of our systems continue to oppress people of color? Because we're diluting, like, it's a conflict for me. Like, I don't know the right answer. I think there should be civil rights and equity for all, but where's the fight start? Like, what needs to be first and upfront?
So I'll take the intersectionality issue. Let me note one thing. I underscore that we all should be voting. I think that we all should be voting. I think about the voting issue within our community a lot because we just have very, very low turnout, and in fact, many of us don't even know when the voting day is. I do think, though, that we have to be mindful again, and I'm always in this space of being very humble, that I've been given so much, and so I always think about Maslow's the hierarchy, about what you need to be able to be thoughtful about what you believe you have the power to do and to change. So I just want to make sure that we're not coming from a class system, being very sensitive that when people are living under apathy or hopelessness, that sometimes showing up just doesn't matter, and that may not be a concept depending on what class you're in that you really understand. So I just want to mention that. But the intersectionality issue, I appreciate that any of the arguments about us having one voice, because there's a lot of work to do. As someone who embodies being Black and being a woman and coming from generational poverty and generational uneducation, I think that their voice is needed, smart voices, strong voices needed everywhere. So when you're talking about violence against Black people, violence against women is actually worse. When you are talking about representation around Black people, representation within women within industry is even worse. When you're talking about women Black people being able to make decisions at a boardroom table and there's none there, you are also going to see there's even less women there. So I think that there is enough to go around, and I instead would say, let's not talk about it. I would say, let's recruit more people, because there's a lot of work to do. So if you don't get fired up about being Black, which I do, and you get more fired up about being a woman and you're Black, I say come to the fold. But if the fold only looks like there's only one way to fold it, then it doesn't make it wide enough to others to be within the folds. So that's my answer.
Too much else to add, although I would say we've seen an evolution, at least in my generation, from, the Black Power movement and how it manifested itself on college campuses, and then the evolution of minority affairs and multicultural affairs and diversity and inclusion. But I wouldn't necessarily say it's diluted unless you don't have people anymore talking about the historic oppression of Black people. I think there's room to discuss that because that's still our reality. But there are some other identity groups that face oppression and discrimination, and I think we have to speak against those as well.
May I just say one other thing? The civil rights movement, especially the March on Washington, when we had all of our greatest people speaking during that time, culminating with Martin Luther King, Dr. King. I've read, and there's copious information. There's not one woman, and we had many women. Dorothy Height, we had Coretta Scott, we had many women who had voice. And even in the civil rights movement, even in that momentous moment, women did not have the right to step up and speak. That is unacceptable, unacceptable.
Diane Nash.
Good evening. My name is Gary Pullen. I'm a St. Clair graduate. I have comments more than I have questions. To my brother on the end. When I first started St. Clair, I took a class called African Studies. And to my best knowledge, I had in our African Studies class, we had 7 whites, 7 blacks, a couple of Mexicans, and different other nationalities. About the second week of that class, there was only 1 white, 7 blacks, still the 2 Mexicans. But my comment is basically, we need, and I hope that you will get with your counterpart whites, Caucasians, to research, as we were just discussing reparation, and the big issue was research. They want to start at research. And I would just like for our Caucasian sisters and brothers to take the initiative to research, to really learn about the African heritage. And I know you probably have, and my brother on the end, but we need more of that, and that's where we at with it, just to, so when they do come and help, that they know where we've been, where we're from.
Yes, my name is Abdullah Shaker, and I got a couple comments. One of the things that I noticed has been happening in our community, you know, like it used to be a real good talk about community action and things that's happening in the community. Because back in the 1940s, the idea was to have communities where you had hospitals, stores, banks, and et cetera in the community, where people, you know, could walk and go to those different places. I know times is changing, and you got cars, more cars now, and you can get to other places much quicker. But when they take these things out of our community, especially the African American communities, we got to go way across town to someplace else where it's their community. It's not our community no more. So that's what's happening here in Dayton. And I blame a lot of this on our leaders, and then on a lot of some of the African Americans that has money. You should invest in our community, you know, and you're not doing that. So we need to start stepping up ourselves as well.
Good evening. Thank you for hosting this discussion. What a wonderful time to hear your perspective. And as a Daytonian and a millennial, I just have a question for the panel as to how do you want white allyship to look? And how can we best support you? I know that David mentioned, you know, obviously in our spaces of influence, but beyond just our families and combating racist discourse with our friends and our colleagues, how can we be more of a presence to help uplift you from the ground, which we are seeing you on the ground, and how specifically in Dayton can we do that, and how can we educate ourselves on the systemic injustices? Thankfully, as a alumni, I've been taking a systematic injustice course, which has been wonderful. So I'm being enlightened to all of this, but how can I learn more and for our millennial friends to spread that word? So thank you.
Now, thank you for your question. But I would say that you can become a member of the NAACP, okay? You know, you can get engaged that way. You know, we do have a youth, you know, young adult committee that would be glad to take you in, you know, and teach you a little about the NAACP. So that could be a first step. And to me, do you know what you just did? You exercised leadership when you just stood up and made that statement. You exercise leadership. So I want you a part of my team.
And Daniel, I would say she created a bridge. Would you say that? Which is what is your expertise?
That's right. I just wanted to comment about the history class as well, and the prolific exit of white students as the course went on. In my experience, and the people that I get to spend time with from a variety of perspectives and experiences, there are four kind of misperceptions about what race relations is, the conditions of race relations that make it very problematic for people to get out of their own way to imagine something new. So I just wanted to throw them out there quickly, because if we can help deposition people from these misperceptions, we often get ourselves into a much better conversation. The first one is that race is all influencing, right? That each race is a monolithic experience or idea. So all black people are, all white people are, all underrepresented people are. And people who hold this often feel good about holding it because they recognize how unique and special the black community is. What they don't realize is that they're robbing people's humanity from them in some remarkable. The second one is that the race is a social construct idea, right, which we know is true, and there are people who lean so deeply into this race is a social construct thing, so I can be colorblind, so I'm colorblind. That's not helpful at all, right? You can be color brave, but being colorblind is an act of privilege. It's willful ignorance, right? So that's not helpful. So we don't teach colorblindness. The third is that race is personal, or that my relational exposure to race supersedes some systemic woe. This is the, well, I have a black friend argument, right? So I think I'm in a good place to have this conversation. And then the fourth is that the racial relation conversation solved. We had civil rights, right? We're done. It's less common now. But the implications of that, I still encounter a lot, is that all of the disparities that we see within communities of color are self-imposed. That's the holdover from we have civil rights, so if communities of color can get together, that's on them. So unpacking one of those four perceptions for me is about keeping whites in the classroom on African history, or about empowering white ally friends. Is trying to figure out what misperception, or where are you positioning yourself within this. For me, race is a way of categorizing and control, right? And you can't walk away from the systemic decision-making from those in power to keep So I'll just stop. I just wanted to throw out some misperceptions about where we are in race relations and ways that people feel good about having the race conversation, ways that actually disempowers and disenfranchises both them and those that are trying to serve.
It's not easy to talk about it. Creates a lot of discomfort for a lot of people, black and white. You know, so.
She comes up as Joe. Joe, come on up. I just want to say that one of the direct things you can do is encourage other millennials to please vote. Please vote.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, NAACP, for hosting this. Just have a comment and a question. So when you asked the question earlier, Marsha, about the eradication of racism and just my perspective, one of the first things America has to do, it has to admit that it has a race problem. It hasn't done that yet. And that problem demonstrates itself in the killing, the legalized killing of black American citizens every day because of internal fears. It demonstrates itself in the encampment and cages of migrants who are fleeing for their lives. It demonstrated itself in slavery and also in the women's suffrage movement. But my question is, I can't remember the doctor's name. When you talk, pardon me? Okay. I'm not going to try that, respectfully. But when we talked, you talked about the definition of hate groups. I just got to touch on this. There are aggravating and mitigating circumstances to everything that we do. And not that my father was an original Black Panther from West Philly. I grew up under that. So one of the things I know about my dad is that there was not a hated bone in his body. He was a black man who moved us out to the country in Farmersville, Ohio, and there were no other black people, except for the only black thing I saw was the bats at nighttime. And he did that on purpose. But as we talk about who gets to define what a hate group is, I want to get your perspective. This is not to defend any one group, but the Black Panther Party has never been about hate. It doesn't have the power to do that. Your perspective on that?
And the difference between that Black Panther Party and the new Black Panther Party.
Yes,
is there a difference?
Yes,
obviously one is new.
I just want to clarify, because some people may not realize that the group Marsha mentioned and the group that I mentioned is the new Black Panther Party, which has no connection to the original Black Panther Party. And many of the founders and leaders of the original group have strongly denounced the new Black Panther Party, which is very openly racist and anti-Semitic. So neither one of us was referring to that group, even though they have similar names.
And again, the new Black Panther Party, that was designated a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. And it was, we did say the new. Yes. Gotcha. Thank you, Dr. Pitkavich.
Good evening. My name is Natalie January Higginbotham. And I have to be very frank with you. First of all, thank you. This is so important for the community. But I have to be very frank with you and tell you that I came here with my soul bleeding tonight. The wounds so rich. And I think everybody in this room, irrespective of race, can identify with something that's recently happened that just broke them. For me, it was Eric Garner. And I say that because I spent 21 years in the United States Air Force, 10 years as a police officer. So I know the right from wrong. I know the proper training, the improper training. And more importantly, I'm a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so my soul is wounded and heavy. And while I appreciate this forum, and I have a question, I'm getting to a question here, and I'm not sure who it's for. But I need to take something out of here tonight because I'm so broken, and I know I'm not the only one. The thing that is really disturbing me is what this young lady mentioned a few moments ago. We have a situation in America where we are expecting to retrain police officers when they're 35 and 40. And I don't care if you're a doctor, a police officer, or what you are, if you have not learned when you're this high how to respect other people, there is no retraining for you. So here's the question, because I think the answer, or at least part of the answer, is to change the American history books so that it reflects me and you, okay? Because the story that, and I had Black history training, but I had to wait until I was in high school and make it a, what is that word? An elective. It should not be an elective, because you won't learn to love and respect the contribution of my people, and I won't learn to respect the contribution of the Asian American if we're not being taught the true history. So my question is, how do we impact and affect that so that the education system can start, because we're missing it at home, right? Does that make sense?
No, I would say that I 100% agree with you, in terms of the books. That's something I've been trying to challenge for a long time. I've gotten nowhere with it, but we're going to continue to try, because I do believe that when when the kids are taught in American history is not really what American history was, and yes, I don't know what it's going to take to make it happen, but you know what? I'm going to talk to my legal redress chair to see if I can talk to that individual to kind of see where we can go with that, because I've been trying that for a very long time. I've been talking about it for a long time, but now you're going to move me to action to get a what? Result.
Okay, I'm sorry, Derek, you were wrapping
That's
that up.
it.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm trying to give equal time to everybody here. Yes, your question.
I'll be quick. So I was raised in Mississippi. My 16th birthday present was a Greyhound bus ticket and enrollment into Dayton Job Corps. The day I arrived here in 1990, the Klan were here having a rally. For me, the fact that they are here, are back rather, is a sign of the times. I'd like to hear from those that were here who had a voice and who were able in 1990, what efforts were made to encourage and to educate the community as we are today.
So is that a question for anyone? Okay, well, I know two people inside this room who was here back in the 90s. One is Joelle. She was here, so maybe she could speak on that. And then also one of our former presidents, Floyd Johnson, was also here, at that time when they came in town. So either one of those two, I think, can speak to your question. Because I wasn't here. Well, I was here, but I wasn't downtown.
Okay, we're going to move forward. We have a young lady with a quick question, and we can speak. Maybe perhaps she can speak with Mr. Johnson a little later. Your question, please.
I do want to just underscore the sister who is saying, and what I hear, if you don't mind, is that not enough was done.
It was the first time I came to Dayton in 1980, and it was the first big story. I came in March, and in April, I covered the Klan in Middletown. And I was speaking with Dr. Pitcavage, and it was the first time I had actually looked at someone who hated me, who looked at me with such hate. And I wasn't afraid, I was curious. I mean, how do you hate somebody you don't even know? How do you give somebody that kind of look and to let me know that they hated me. And I just looked at them like, wow, how do you do that? You know, and it just made me really curious more than I wasn't afraid. I just don't have that level of comprehension to understand how you can not know me and look at me because I'm dark-skinned and you give me this look of such hate. And I really, in a real weird way, everybody, because it's just me, felt kind of sorry for them, really. And just kind of, hey, there's nothing you can do about it, unfortunately, but it is so curious to me as to that level of dislike, that level of hatred, that level of inhumanity. I don't know.
And I would say that, doesn't it, though, Marcia, start with, do we, I think about this with our kids, with the disparity of how our kids are educated and the lack of resources, and isn't that hate?
Yeah. Yes.
I look at,
Yes.
my husband was walking and coming across the street to our home, and we live right here in Grafton Hills, and he was stopped for jaywalking. Right. Isn't that a form of hate?
Oh, yeah.
And so it should not blow our mind that people who have a proclivity to take it to the extreme, when you have this residual microaggression that is constantly being fermented and rolled around, we should not be stunned by those who take it to the extreme. Right? That was so it wasn't an indictment that we didn't do enough of the brothers and sisters who walked the front line. I don't think that we are articulating the problem. This isn't the KKK is the issue. The issue is that we have platforms that the KKK can exist and want to come here. That's the issue. That someone asked my little boy 6 months ago, let me touch your hair. That's the issue. I've never touched a black little boy's hair. That's where that can exist, because all that residual micro hatred does exist.
Your question, Clay.
So I want to thank her for mentioning the education, because that can contribute to Let Me Touch Your Hair, because if it's not starting in the education books when they're little, the curiosity would come out when they're bolder and older. But my real question is, when you mentioned black on black crime, and I have a concern with that term, because do you feel that when you mention black on black crime that you're subscribing to the media-driven term of just general violence? Because black people, have crime or commit crime against each other the same way Asians, white, Mexicans. So I feel like that kind of contributes to the stereotype that black people are more violent to each other. So that means when they come to our side of town, they'll be even more violent to people who don't look like them.
So you asked me,
no, you said it.
You talking to me? It's me, right?
Well, yes, because you mentioned something. Yes.
She said it was him.
No, because earlier.
To be fair, I've used that term before, but Derek said it tonight.
Well, in one of your responses, you mentioned black on black crime and how we treat each other, which I truly believe in. But when you mention black on black crime, I think that's just a national, maybe even global term that people use to strengthen their reason for racism or fear of us.
No, so basically what I said very clearly is, when I see black on black violence, that hurts me to my core. That's what I said, because it does. So that will never go away. Now, I fight NAACP fights racism every day at our office. So we fight the white oppressor. But at the end of the day, it's not just about that. The NAACP has always been about equal treatment, has always been about equal justice. So at the end of the day, for us, and for me personally, I do take it personally when I see one of my brothers go out and kill one of my brothers. I take that personally, and that's why on our Facebook page, we put the statistics out there, on murders and homicides. So numbers sometimes don't lie. You can make numbers be what you want them to be, but when it comes down to different individuals killing one another for which could also go to systemic issues as well, us not having the jobs and things like that. But I don't like making excuses. I do not like us killing one another, period.
That's right. Right.
Hey guys. So this will be quick. You guys talk about a lot of stuff, and that's fine. But in my opinion, only one of you talked about what really matters, and that is, how do you get, or how do you propose we as a society get more black males to stay with their baby mamas and be fathers to the children? Because the family structure, that is, the lack of family structure is what I feel is a really big problem.
All right, I knew somebody was listening. No, but great question. Now, black on black, I have used that term. The one you just used, I do not use. But the one that started with a B. But, you know, again, I think it's extremely important. And the point I was trying to make earlier, and I didn't want to turn this into point, counterpoint, but, you know, what the point I was trying to make earlier is that, you know, we do, as individuals, have to take care of our own families as much as possible. We work in Montgomery County, we have the finest reentry structure probably in the country. We do everything we can to help folks come up that are not in that structure yet. But at the same time, the system can only do so much. And so my point was similar to what you're saying. What we try to do is to empower fathers so that they understand their importance, first of all, because society is very oppressive of men, especially black men, as it comes to their role as parents. And so we attempt to do that and make sure that they understand how important they are. I grew up with a great dad, and it really had a big impact on my life. So I think your point is well taken, maybe not phrased the way we might want you to phrase it, but I certainly understand what you're saying. So the point being is it's up to all of us to take care of our children as much as possible, and the system definitely needs to help in those efforts. There's no question.
I hope we get some of the millennial voices over there.
Want to make sure we get some of the young folks.
Right. We have a young man here.
Oh, he's 17. Okay.
Yeah, he was.
20 years ago. Good evening, everybody. My name is Norman Scarce. I was privileged enough to be elected as a board member for Trotwood Madison City Schools. And so when the questions were raised about education, I want to address those just real quick. But I also want to say to my brother right over here, how dare you? How dare you?
Oh. Wait, we're not, let's, okay. Okay, we're not going to do that.
Let me please address
that. But
about the education.
Yes, but we're not going to do that. He had a question. It was a question that was mentioned, a subject that was mentioned by a panelist, and he needed an answer. We're not going to do that.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So in terms of the education, and I don't know if many people might know this or not, but your local school district is probably going to be the largest employer in your area, as well as the largest government entity with the most disposable income. So when we talk about education in terms of what are we going to teach our children, how are we advancing that point of education so that they learn the things that they need to learn in pre-K and in kindergarten, a lot of it is because we have a curriculum adoption every year that your local school board gets to vote on. And 9 times out of 10, for as long as I've sat in the seat, I've never had parents come and say, this is what I would like to be taught in my school. Not that the people you vote for aren't doing that, but you are just as empowered to come and sit before the people and stand before the people that you put in place and tell us what it is you would like to see with the dollars that that we're spending. Because most of the times, and I'll say this just because I have the benefit of seeing the books, most of the districts in our area aren't underfunded. The money is just misspent. So districts like Trotwood Madison, where I'm fortunate to be a board member, we have $45 million that we have to spend with no community.
What is your question, please?
I just wanted to address that.
Okay, thank you. We only have 5 minutes left. We're going to get, as Dr. Forward, has instructed me, we're going to get some of these young folks here. Lovely lady, make it quick, please, dear. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Anna Smaki, and I have a question. So I heard from a lot of people that the education is the problem. So I feel more that what we're not teaching people at school is what we are not teaching them is a problem, but what we're teaching them is an even bigger problem. As someone who's not from the U.S., when I go places, people be like, do you come from a jungle in Africa? I feel like what we're teaching them is that these people are savages, these people are like this. So we are not, what we're teaching them is what's making them think the way they think. Not what we are not teaching them, because what we are not teaching them, they need that. But it needs to be supplemented. So how do you think we can help, how do you think as people here, we can help, impact those changes on, education and, curriculum and whatever is needed so that students learn what is needed in school?
I think number one, importantly, what the previous speaker said, as a parent, go to the school. Always make sure you're there. Don't miss any conferences, don't miss any opportunities to go speak up for your children, for our culture, and for everything else.
I think, too, you don't have to wait for curriculum vote time. And also, I think curriculum can be really intimidating for a lot of people. We don't feel like we have the information that we're formed out to make strategic asks. The Ohio School Board Association, of which every single school district in Ohio is a member of, except one, has just started a new diversity and equity consulting arm. And I think it's always the right time to go to your school district and ask, are we training our teachers, who statistically are white teachers, how to create space in their classroom for students to be safe, to explore who and why they are? And are we training and coaching our white teachers in the privilege that they have, and how that might be influencing the way they interact with students that come from experiences, with lived experiences that are different from their own? So I think it's always
And we have a millennial question here. There's a young lady who wants to know what is being done to help the immigrant community in this community. Why don't you go ahead?
My name is Kenzie Zelaya, and my question is, what is Dayton doing to welcome the immigrant community? What are you doing to empower them?
I'll just take that really quickly. From our point of view, from the Ywca, the elimination of racism is just very clearly systemic to the way Black Africans were brought over to the United States and then the systems that were put in place for that. However, as I'm saying that, for the empowerment of women, and as we look at all the lens between racism, diversity, parity, and equity, there is some cultural and social issues that go directly to violence and the increase of violence against women, specifically immigrant women and women of color. Education, housing, and so for all of those issues, we have safe places here, and we work specifically with communities of the culture to ensure that we have subject matter expertise to welcome in women, specifically around the issues around centrality, to ensure that they are able to get their needs met specifically within those spaces. What everyone else's subject matter expertise within immigrant population, I'll step back so they can speak on.
As we talk about race relations, I've heard Black and African American, I heard Hispanic and Latino, Latinx, Asian American. I haven't heard anything about indigenous people, and I do have a person back there who might, that may not be her question, but I'm just wondering if we can allow her to speak.
And the turquoise shirt? Okay, we have a couple of minutes. They're pushing me to wrap this up. Oh, don't run. Oh.
You wrap it up.
Okay.
Thank you for that, Mila. Appreciate the solidarity. My name's Summer McGuire. I'm the Vice President of the Dayton Council for the Latinos, I'm all tongue-tied now, League of United Latin American Citizens, LULAC. We're basically kind of like your counterparts, Mr. Forward, as kind of like the Latino NAACP. It's a 90-year-old organization, councils all over the place. We got 2 in Dayton, 10 across the state. So my question is, and if I may be so bold as to give y'all homework, because we're short on time, and this isn't really a question I expect you to be able to answer right now, but how are each of you going to step back into your communities and back into the amazing work you're doing, and you are doing amazing work, and thank you for this time, to reach out to get the communities involved, reach back, Black and brown coming together, reaching out to the Latino organizations right here in the city of Dayton that are ready to work alongside y'all, to the Native American, American Indian groups that are right here, my Council for Native Americans, you get the Dayton Rapid Response, we got Latinos Unidos. There's lots of folks that are ready. And to be honest, I have to say it, there's not a whole lot on the panel. So that's my request, is that you take that and find ways, ask yourselves, that's my question. How can I create more of these bridges, because we're standing here right shoulder to shoulder with you, ready to do the work. And I also wanted to say, as a person who's white passing, I feel like I can make a comment and say, I would encourage my white allies to, because I identify as Latina and Indigenous, but my daddy's a white guy from Beaver Creek, so I'm complicated. So I encourage somebody when they're standing in their white privilege in a conversation like this to never be so bold as to say, I heard one thing of value. We need to find ways to reach out to each other and to value each other more than that.
Well, I just want to say
Quickly.
This forum is doing just what she's saying. Tomorrow, Saturday's forum is doing exactly what you're saying. There's close to 50 organizations, which includes your organization, that we all reached out to. Then on Sunday, same thing. So at the end of the day, you're going to see exactly what you're saying on Saturday and on Sunday. And move forward with forward.
Thank you, panel. Thanks to everybody. Listen, I'm sorry I couldn't get to everybody. We did run out of time because it's mandated that we have to be out of the building by 8 o'clock. So we're going to wrap up in a second. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being here. Really, we really do appreciate it. This has been a difficult conversation, but we want you to leave with some peace and prayer from Reverend Herman Branham.
Let us bow our heads. Let us bow our heads, please. I said to you, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. To those who strike you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from those who take away your cloak, do not withhold the coat as well. Give to everyone who begs from you. And of those who take away your goods, do not ask them again. And as you wish that others would do to you, do to them also. Be generous in prosperity and thankful in adversity. Be fair in judgment and guarded in speech. Be a lamp unto those who walk in darkness, and a home to the stranger. Be the eyes of the blind, and a guiding light unto the feet of the errings. Be a breath of life to the body of humankind, a dew to the soil of the human heart, and a fruit upon the tree of humanity. Leave in peace. Good night.
Thank you, panelists, very much for all of your information. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Marsha.
It's always a very good idea to be in a place where you hear the honesty of the people in the audience, but also the responses from the panel. I thought the panel was excellent, and Marsha was great. So thank you for having this tonight, especially in light of who's coming to town on Saturday. This was very timely. Thank you very much.
Just probably the thing I took away is that it's difficult to be black, and that there are a lot of structural elements in our society that make black life harder than it is for a white person like me.
So being from Detroit, I could definitely take away a few parallels compared to Dayton and back home. There's a lot of work we need to do, but just from being in that room, I can feel that so many people want to make a difference. And having such an esteemed and educated panel, I think really gave people the source they need to, get a leg up in terms of their activism and their race like relations education. So I'm really happy I went, and I think this is just one of the few early steps that Dayton needs to take in the right direction in order to make social change.
I found it very informative tonight. It just brought home the whole idea that there's so much more work to do, and I want to be involved in any way I can. I'm managing a farmer's market here in Dayton, and I'm going to make sure that we are going to be more of a help to this community in any way we can. And I'm going to promise myself to make the best effort I can with it. Thank you.
First of all, I want to say long live Black women, because we have to admit that Black women did kill her on that stage. All their answers were perfect. And one thing that I'm going to walk away with from this meeting with is that, like, there is more work to do, and we will be expecting results. But this will not happen unless everyone, meaning you and I and every people, and even people, white people, privileged people, who don't want to admit that there is a problem. So when we admit that there is a problem, then we can work together to get results. So everything that was said in that room resonated with me on many levels, because I feel like what we are hoping to get out of this is realistic, and we can get to it. Thank you. I'm Anna Samaki, and I am a senior at NTR College in Yellow Springs, Ohio.
So, again, I have to say, long live Black women. Like, that was insane. Like, they made really good comments. And another thing that I'm taking away from all of this conversation that just happened is that there is just so much work that we need to do. Also, to represent those that go unrepresented. Like, how can we give voice to undocumented people, to immigrants, to refugees that cannot come to conversations like this? What are we doing for them to know their rights? What are we doing to support them? Are there any like social services that are being provided for them? What is the Dayton community doing in order to be inclusive to this community? How can we make sure that these people are feeling safe in a place that is telling them like you don't belong here, and how is it possible to even like deconstruct like constructs regarding about Hispanic people being called Mexicans, quote unquote? How are we letting people know, hey, we're not ignorant because we're not from the US? These are all like conversations that need to happen, and there's a lot of work that we need to do regarding that, and that's what I'm taking out of this conversation. Thank you. Oh, and my name is Kenzie Celaya, and I'm a second year at Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio. Thank you.
Hi there, Summer McGuire. I'm the Vice President of the Dayton LULAC Council. LULAC is the League of United Latin American Citizens. We've got 2 councils actually here in Dayton, 10 across the state. It's we're basically kind of like a sister organization, brother and sister organization to you all with the NAACP. We're a 90-year-old civil rights organization serving the needs of the Latino community across the country. And there's councils all across the states. So what I took away from today was that there's amazing work going on in the city of Dayton. I know it. We proudly stand shoulder to shoulder as part of it. There's also a lot of work to do, and that's no surprise to any of us that have been doing movement work for decades upon decades upon decades. I commend everyone who stepped onto the panel today, and for Ms. Bonhart for facilitating as beautifully as she did. It was a wonderful event. I'd also like to hear more voices and see more tangible action. So I feel like this was a good step in a positive direction. I was a little disappointed at not hearing more Latino and Indigenous voices, maybe some more LGBTQ. I know we're talking about race relations, but as we know, the Klan is pretty equal opportunity in their hate. They're definitely a homophobic organization as well. So I can't help but think about all those other communities that would stand alongside of us if only we can remember to reach out and build those coalitions and build those bridges. I'm so proud of the statement that our young sister just said about looking also at our undocumented brothers and sisters. We've got organizations here in the community, the LULAC, Latinos Unidos, the Dayton Rapid Response Group. Welcome Dayton has been really instrumental also in working closely with immigrants and refugees in the area. And we have a human rights responsibility as Daytonians, as Ohioans, and really as Americans, to look out for each other and to look out for the most vulnerable and the most affected. And that means people who are fleeing horrible things that in some cases our country has a hand in creating. We need to find ways for them. Comprehensive immigration reform is essential, and you don't answer great need and great duress and absolute devastation with caging children and with criminalizing people. So I look forward to building solutions with folks here, and I appreciate you guys, as always, for doing what you do in the community, NAACP. Thank you. And this is my daughter, Maddie, also. I got to introduce her. Next generation, right? That's how we do it, y'all.